So we'll be getting started in just another minute or two, but I want to do a sound check for those of you online first. Thumbs up if you can hear me okay. Great, thanks for that. And I'm assuming people can hear me in the room. And please start taking some time to settle into your meditation posture, even as people continue to join us online and here in the room. So listening to the body, and we learn so much just in this settling. Like, for example, we learned that we have to accept the body as it is today, at this time. So given how the body is today at this time, what is the appropriate posture? Out of compassion, we're not being idealistic and trying to match or look like the perfect meditator. But each of us, in our own way, finding that balance of relaxation in the body and an upright posture that supports alertness. What is the balance between those two values? And there's a kind of courage too, this willingness to be right in the middle, awake and relaxed at the same time. Not afraid to be undefended. We're not afraid to be soft and released in the body, open. This willingness to feel whatever's moving in the body, in the heart and mind. To be right in the middle, sensitive. So the safety that we can experience and the stability, it isn't so much about finding the perfect place for the body and the mind in our meditation. It's much more about developing a wisdom and understanding that knows that it's okay to be feeling, seeing what we're feeling and seeing in our experience. So you could call this non-attachment, free from expectations, not needing the moment to be different. Can this be okay, that it feels like this, it is like this now? The body, the way the mind is, quality of the heart. What we know, what we can know clearly is that it is like this now. And I'm not talking about how we explain things to ourselves, but in a more immediate, direct sense, it is like this. We're feeling what we're feeling. And in this place of some degree of acceptance, allowing the conditions to be the way they are in the body, in the mind, internally, externally. So with this relative stability, we'll notice all the conditioned habits to want things to be other than the way they are. Often it will manifest as a impulse to move the body, to make an adjustment. So don't get tight about that, but just notice that. Notice those impulses to move, as opposed to just accepting what it feels like to not move. And just explore both the moving because of the impulse to move, but also explore the refraining from moving, just to notice, well, can I just feel what it feels like when there's an impulse to move the body? It's not about getting tight or being more controlling. We're really trying to learn about the mind. So in the same way, we might have an impulse to problem solve or think about something, plan something, or whatever the impulse might be. And again, we have the option to just feel what it feels like to have that impulse in the mind, versus feel what it feels like to feel obligated to think out whatever that impulse is telling us to think out. So as we sit and as we settle some, we'll notice this whole world of the mind naturally having its likings and its dislikings, and feeling the impulses that come out of whatever the mind is liking and the impulses that come out of whatever the mind is not liking as we're sitting here. And we can do our best to be skillful in that place where the likings and the not likings keep arising. Liking this sensation, not liking that sensation. Liking this sound, not liking that sound. Liking one memory, disliking another memory. But we can also train the mind to seclude itself from all that activity of liking and disliking. Basically giving the mind a break from being triggered in the way it gets triggered. So, for example, when we tune in to the ordinary rhythm of breathing in and breathing out that's happening now in the body, and we train the mind to be interested in the physicality of breathing in from the beginning of the in-breath to the end, and then training the mind to be interested to keep the exhalation in mind from the beginning to the end. And as you probably know, we're not trying to control the breathing process. We're using the mind's interest, its attentiveness with the breathing process to let go of whatever else it would be getting pushed around by. So this is the beginning of what we call seclusion. Just a very skillful habit to be able to use, to let go of the normal pattern of our mind, or normal habit patterns of our minds, and to cultivate a new habit, which is to be attentive in this relaxed, continuous way with the breathing process. And when there is some of that wholesome continuity, present moment awareness of breathing in and breathing out, then you'll start to experience the mind being secluded from what would be normally pushing it around, our likings, our not likings. So just explore for yourself what gets set in motion when I sincerely connect with the breathing process in the body. And just keep in mind what it feels like to be breathing in from the beginning to the end, however that breath is, smooth or erratic, from the beginning of the out-breath to the end of the out-breath. And learning to be awake to the breathing process without feeling any need to control it. It may feel controlled, but we're not intentionally trying to make it any particular way. And bring some real heartfelt sincerity to this effort to keep the breathing process in mind, to not forget. And finally, one more instruction. When you do forget, the mind gets distracted. As soon as you notice that, be forgiving, even with a sense of humor, about the tenacious habits of our mind, to worry, to plan, to think, whatever. And just begin again. That's how we train the mind. So remember, this is all about learning. And when the mind is entangled with its liking and disliking, some drama about fixing something in my life, we want to appreciate the juiciness. The mind seems to be getting something from the entangled thinking, planning, worrying, whatever that particular kind of thinking is. But we also want to notice the stressfulness of the entanglement at the same time. And when we return to the breath, return to the present moment, and the mind is at least temporarily free of those entangling thoughts, we want to notice what that release feels like, the not being entangled with the drama. As if we were carrying a heavy backpack and we were able to just put it down. So we're going to be sitting for another 2 minutes or so. Just continue to sense when there is some seclusion from our self-centered dramas, worries, hopes, whatever. And whether that freedom comes from being attentive to the breathing process, or one way or another, just this continuity of present moment awareness. And for the last few seconds, let the eyes open if they've been closed. Just gazing to the floor in front of us, and for a few more seconds, keeping the body relatively still. See if you can sense the seclusion. So again, the mind is secluded from being entangled in its dramas about this and that, even with the eyes open. We want to get to know what it feels like when the mind is not entangled in any way. So you could call it the peace of non-entanglement. And then when you feel ready, just begin to move the body. Some people like to do this gesture with the hands in front, just as a gesture of gratitude for the practice. Do some mindful stretches if you want. Good to have you all here today. Thanks for coming on this cold morning. So as promised, I'm going to continue the talk from last week on sensuality, and it's important to come with a warning because there is the shadow, not just in Buddhism, but I think it's fair to say generally in spiritual circles, of making our world of sense experience the bad thing. You know, like if only I didn't have a body, if only I didn't have desire, if only I didn't like pleasant things, if only I didn't exist, then I'd be happy. Something like that. And the Buddha was very clear that the problem is craving, or the attachment to sense experience, to sensuality. It's mistaking sense experience or sensuality for something that it's not. Right? We tend to imagine that sense experience is going to deliver something to me that I can bank, that I can count on, that's going to change my life. But we've had a lot of really nice experiences, I'm guessing, most of us. And yet, the hunger for more, has that gone away? It hasn't. So we want to be really honest with ourselves. And the people we know who have a lot, you know, their beautiful bodies and intelligence and money and status and privilege, and does it seem, you know, that their habit of craving has been diminished? No, not. I mean, I don't think it's fair to say that. So just a review for people who maybe weren't here last week, I started off with this quote from Sylvia Boorstein, and the first part is, and just reflect in terms of your own experience. Sylvia Boorstein wrote, "Desire pulls so hard, it's surprising to find that it's empty." So this is something that each of us can contemplate, like whenever desire gets triggered in us, you know, which is almost all the time. Even like the desire for this to be over and, you know, on to Sunday's lunch or whatever. We have all kinds of desires, you know, the desire to scratch an itch. So that the tug of desires is a real thing that we all know when we feel that the desire to move, the desire to swallow, the desire to scratch, the desire to think something through. But we're not going to learn about the empty nature of desire unless we just observe it instead of acting on the desire. So when you hear, like in Buddhism and in other practices, when you hear people talk about restraint or not acting on desire, it's not, you know, wise people don't think desire is bad. But just because desire isn't inherently evil doesn't mean it isn't skillful to observe desire without trying to gratify it sometimes. Because we learn a lot about the nature of desire, that we really need to refrain from acting on it in order to learn about. Like, we don't really, if I pursue every desire that arises in my mind, I'm going to miss a lot about the nature of desire. Like I think last week I mentioned, you know, just plan your meals as you normally do, but then at the last minute, just say to yourself, okay, I'm not going to eat that meal, you know. And just, you'll learn a lot about the desire to eat that meal by not eating it. You'll just be sitting there, there's the meal, it's your meal, you know. It would be totally fine for you to eat that meal. But just to observe the not eating it. Or, you've got an evening free Saturday night, and there's a program on that you like or whatever, and you just decide to refrain from it. Or you sit every morning, let's say, and you decide, doing your best, not to move the body when you sit, but to appreciate the stillness, even when there are impulses to move. I could move, just like I could think that thought, but I'm just going to return to the breath. And it's not about being good even. It's about the desire, the wholesome desire to understand the nature of the mind. And one of the most obvious and important aspects of our mind, our conditioned mind, or habit-based minds, is this force of desire. And when we take desire personally, we call it craving, clinging. And that's when it becomes a problem, when we misunderstand desire. And that's what we get to see, like when we're studying a desire, because on purpose we're not acting it out, not trying to gratify the desire. So it's there, maybe not continuously, like it blooms and it's strong, and then maybe it fades, and then it reasserts itself. Same thing like when you're a little cold and you want to get a sweater. It's like nobody's saying that it's wrong to get a sweater. But it's very interesting to feel that impulse, like hating the cold, wanting the warmth, right? Oh, this is desire. When the mind personalizes it, it sort of gets supercharged, the desire. Because now it's me that wants to put my sweater on. Me that thinks it's stupid to be sitting here when my sweater's 20 feet away. It's my sweater, by the way. Forget this Buddhism stuff. But wisdom can just always keep stepping back and just observe that. And I think I mentioned this to some degree in the guided sit this morning, like the insight to see that desire goes away even without gratifying it. If we know that, like when the desire emerges, gets triggered, if we knew that right at that moment, if we could say to ourselves in our mind, yeah, that desire is really strong now, the tug is really there, I feel it, but I also know it will go away without me acting on this desire, whatever it is, and especially those more tenacious addictions that we have. When we're sad to want to eat, or, whatever the pattern might be. I mean, each of us have our own sort of ways that we use sense experience, usually sense pleasures, to sort of deal with the unpleasantness of life that comes with living. And to feel the strong tug, but to know that, yeah, I could do that, but it will go away with whether I do that or not. And generally, when we do it, there's an initial pleasantness, but then if we're tracking our actual experience, just that moment that arises actually amazingly quickly, after, like, there's been a tug we're not feeling good about whatever, and there's been a tug to have some sense pleasure. And then you gratify the sense pleasure, and you get a little relief from whatever the heaviness was in your heart, because you had this sense pleasure that was a distraction. But then it inevitably ends. You can't eat ice cream forever, or watch TV forever, or whatever the way that you were taking advantage of some sense pleasure to give yourself some distance from whatever is weighing down your heart. But eventually, you're face to face with that very unique, yucky experience, which is, like, I feel a little spun out for my desperate need for sense pleasure, and I haven't really gotten away from what's burdening my heart, whatever yuckiness I was trying to escape by indulging in a sense pleasure. And even on top of that, what makes it even worse is there can be in that a sense of mistrusting ourselves, because to some degree we believe the promise, you deserve this, indulging in some sense pleasure, because life is hard, and it's going to take care of you, right? And then we find that was a lie. We were basically lying to ourselves. I mean, it was something, the sense pleasure, so we're not pretending it wasn't something, but it didn't really take care of the problem. And we sort of had promised to ourselves in seeking out that sense pleasure that it was going to solve the problem. And then we kind of catch ourselves in that lie, which is can be even more disheartening. Like, it's like that sneaking suspicion, you don't really know what you're doing, do you? Right? And that can support like depressive states of mind and other, less than balanced and wholesome mental states. Because rightfully, it's wrong to think we don't trust ourselves, even though that's how we think. It's just a more Buddhist understanding is this mind has some conditioned habits that are not trustworthy, right? Because that's actually true, at least for me. There are some patterns in my conditioned mind, the habit mind, that are just what they are, less than skillful, not helpful, not onward leading to real happiness for me and for those around me. And it's the way that it is. There are those conditioned habits. So it's good to begin to unpack, like to really start watching how desire, and then with attachment to desire, how craving operates in our minds. And it really helps us to better understand our relationship to sense experience generally, like thinking that sense experience is really here to deliver happiness, almost like a Garden of Eden approach. When we feel or sense the proximity or the abundance of nice sense experiences that are available to me, then we can have that understanding that, it's really mine for the taking. There's this I can do and that I can think about and this experience. And then it's a setup, but for a while it can feel really true. And then we can, once we have experienced the betrayal, like where even with all our privilege and good fortune, we feel that insatiable hunger for some more, no matter how much we experience. And it begins to dawn on the mind that consuming sense experiences doesn't lead to lasting happiness. It's not a trustworthy happiness. We do it because we don't have a better plan. Okay, I'll go cross-country skiing, there's new snow, and it will be, in moments, fun, and then it will be over, And then I have to figure out something else to do, And then on and on like that, right? There's something worrisome about a life that's really oriented to lining up one relatively pleasant experience after another, right? It's stressful. Well, we've been to that restaurant, 4 times. There's got to be another interesting restaurant. I've watched this and that show. There's got to be some other entertainments worth watching out there, Maybe I'll get this subscription to this, Netflix instead of Hulu. Or, we get desperate for, and even our friends can get a little stale. I'll mix it up. We'll do this person, right? I mean, this is, in relationships, this is not uncommon. How many articles do we see in publications about how to spice up relationships, because they've gotten a little stale, And what really breaks my heart, it just kind of burns me a little bit, this is because of attachment, is how this plays out in the whole world of people with pets, and it's not that people are bad, but, they love their pets, but then they get busy or things change and the relationship gets stale. And who suffers? The dog or the cat or the whatever that's not really having a good existence because they're trapped in that relationship of ownership, in the person's home. Yeah, so it's just, there's so much suffering that happens because of this, because of our mind's idea that sensuality, sense experience is here to make me personally happy, to kind of deliver. And we start to objectify the things we relate to, like in terms of, can you make me happy? Oh, you're not making me happy anymore. And it's just a very transactional way to relate to the world. Seeing each other in terms of how you might contribute to my happiness that's about sense experience. Well, it would be cool to get to know you, right? Because I somehow, given how my habit energies are, I think that getting to know you is going to deliver something to me, some status, or I'll have some interesting stories to tell, or whatever it is. But not so much you, And this is just how we move through the world. It's kind of like branding and the idea of becoming who we think we'd be if we were happy. But there's something false under all of it that we sense in moments when there's a little bit more balance and clarity, like, this isn't really working. It's not really delivering the happiness that I think. So then we're interested in teachings like the teachings we get from the Buddha, that is basically saying, just pointing out directly, even before we understand it experientially, but, just hearing it is impactful, that the cause of suffering is craving. And there is an experience that's even hard to imagine, the release from craving. We don't know, we think we know, but we don't really know that full experience when the heart, the mind, is empty of all craving. We can only imagine, and generally we imagine it as non-existence or something like that, But we get a little taste of it in the guided meditation today, this getting a taste of seclusion. The pleasure, we're actually following this thread of pleasure that's not about me getting something, even though it can sound that way, oh, I'm getting concentrated. But it's really, we're following this thread of the mind not needing anything, not dependent on anything. So even though we're like attending to the breath to sort of support the experience of seclusion or meditative concentration, it's really not about paying attention to the breath. It's about the mind abandoning what it normally would be doing, right? So we're using the attentiveness to the breath, but of course it could be many other, that's just one technique. We're using that and bringing a kind of fullness and continuity of attentiveness to that, the breathing process. And the natural effect is the mind isn't worrying, it isn't being pushed around by its liking and disliking. So it begins to feel the absence of the stress, the absence of the burden of me, like even trying to be a good meditator, or I want to sit up straight so people don't think I'm a bad meditator or something like that. I noticed that a lot. I mean, I always had that tendency, but I had some back injuries last winter, some compression fractures. Just the tendency, there's a weakness now in my spine, and it's just hard to stay upright. It's kind of a collapsing, more than usual. And and so that's one thing. But then the desire and the attachment to the desire to not look like a slouch it's just like amazing what burdens we construct for ourselves and carry around. And how much freedom there is, and I mean, whether I'm slouching or not, but not being burdened by the attachment to being one way or another. And I can still mindfully straighten the spine, do my exercises, which I tend to avoid, to strengthen my spine and all that stuff. But it doesn't need the attachment. I mean, we often use fear, and greed to motivate ourselves. But how does that work for ourselves? So we tend to swing between more idealistic points of view where we really think that sense pleasures are going to give me what I really want, what I really need. And then we swing to more pessimistic, sense pleasure is never going to deliver. I keep getting betrayed, or I'm not competent enough to get the sense pleasures that I need in order to be happy, or the world or other people are out to get me and keep me from having what I need. But one way or another, we want to give up on sense pleasures making us happy, right? And then we'll rally our hopefulness and we'll pursue, oh no, I think I can do it. I think I can line things up, experiences the way that I really want them to be, and I'll find real happiness, meaningful happiness, happiness that I can count on. And so we want to understand these in a very normalized way. We don't want to think, only stupid people do this. No, we're the people who do this, where we swing between these two poles. And to really, it's helpful to see that, because it's really in understanding those two poles of giving up on sense experience and indulging, hoping that sense experience is going to deliver a meaningful happiness in my life, that another possibility will get revealed, which is neither this nor that, which is being somebody who is sensitive to sense experience, who knows the difference between pleasure and pain, right? We're not going to lose that, but understands this path of non-attachment. It's like a whole different allegiance, right? Allegiance to the pleasure of non-attachment versus allegiance to the pleasure of having what I want and not having what I don't want, right? So that's just the normal kind of conditioning we get. It's like our birthright, being raised, conditioned by our culture and even by our genetics. We are going to be a being that is thinking the answer is get what I want, don't get what I don't want. And then when we're fortunate and we really see how we've swung back and forth and how both of those two poles aren't going to deliver, and have the good fortune to hear some wise teachings, we're open to the possibility. I mean, it seems a little out of the box. Like, how could non-attachment really be the way that gives my heart what it actually wants? Delivers the peace, the ease, the freedom, the sense of wholeness, the kind of wisdom and love that we might intuit is possible. And the trouble is, we might have some intuition that, yeah, that I'm willing to check that out. But it's like the depth of the habit to pursue sense pleasure is really deep. It's hard to challenge the status quo in our mind, in our heart, around that. Like, we'll get a little, we'll have a sit, and we'll get a little bit into that space of non-clinging to sense experience, just in that peace of seclusion. And then after the sit, it would just make so much sense to pursue sense experience as if it's going to deliver, go go to Sunday brunch. Not that it's wrong to go to Sunday brunch, but to go to Sunday brunch with the idea that the waffles with the is gonna like make me happy. Like it seems a little inappropriate to not it's just our way we've been socialized that when we're experiencing something that appears to be a sense pleasure, we should be like all over it, like, oh, this is so amazing, It would be inappropriate to just approach it in a balanced way. Like our friends would look, well, what's wrong with you? These are great. Why aren't you tight with your joy that you're experiencing, with the pleasure you're experiencing? Well, it's just, sweet and toasty and, all the different textures and the chewing and the, right? That seems like, oh boy, that would be, I definitely don't want that, right? I don't want things to be just what they are. And this is, I don't know if people saw, but the document that's being put into the chat for those of you on Zoom, people in the room, you can always get the document that goes with the talks at our calendar. So just look for the Sunday morning program, and toward the bottom of all the description, you'll see a link for a Google Doc. And I have some articles, including one that I think is really worth taking a look at if this topic is of interest to you, by Thanissaro Bhikkhu, a Western Buddhist monk and great scholar. And he's the abbot of a monastery outside of San Diego. But he got trained in Thai Forest Buddhism as a young man and recently ordained Buddhist monk for maybe even a couple decades before moving back here to the States. But Trading Candy for Gold is the article. And it's really about this willingness to abandon what isn't working for something that really seems to have promise. And we have to check it out. So initially, it's a little bit of borrowed faith, like it doesn't sound very enticing, this happiness of non-attachment, this happiness of dispassion. And dispassion doesn't mean that waffles don't taste good like they used to. It just means that pleasant experience is just that. It's not my savior. Because whether we would say that out loud or not, having pleasant experience is sort of our God. If you not look at what we say, but look at our actions, right? Pleasantness is what we're really devoted to. And the evil things in our lives are things that are painful, like getting sick or having some terrible disease or losing a partner or losing our wealth or our jobs or, or whatever, our safety, losing our safety. These things are not good, and getting our safety is good. So we're in a world that we don't control, this world of sense experience, and we're trying to get something solid for me in this world that we don't control. So even if we're having a good run, there's going to be some anxiety underneath, because we know the good run could end at any time. And it will end. I mean, we tend to forget that, but that's part of the contract, isn't it? So then when we really get that setup, then we're willing to explore this happiness of non-attachment and to see, is it worth orienting my life around? The letting go of craving, the letting go of attachment. Because it sounds a little bit like, well, yeah, attachment hurts, so let it go. And we think of it as like, I'll just stop hitting myself. So it's probably the right thing to do. But we don't think of it as something actually positive, because we haven't pursued it. Like the Buddha says this in a really poignant talk, where he says something like, even I, before my deep insight, even I, when I was a spiritual practitioner, My heart did not leap up at the idea of renunciation, non-attachment. Yeah, it did not. I didn't see it as an end. But then I checked it out, and what he meant by checking it out, he really looked at attachment and what it delivers, and then began to explore non-attachment and looked at what it delivered. It was very pragmatic. And some of you, like for example, some of you who probably have been married for a while or have a long-term friendship with someone, and you've had the good fortune to develop a really close relationship with this person, or it could even be a pet, another being, but without a lot of the entangled qualities that come with attachment. And you might have a flavor from that experience, like, oh yeah, this is so much more satisfying than when I'm expecting this person to make me happy, and I'm upset when they're not making me happy. I mean, we can have that same thing with weather. If it's like we're expecting nice. I noticed, I looked recently at the 10-day forecast, and it's like, I can't believe it, it's going to be winter for the next 10 days, according to the app on my phone. It's like, lucky if we break the high teens for our high for the next 10 days. And it's just like being pushed around by that information. Like, why would we intentionally make our mind vulnerable to something as out of our control as weather? But we do that, don't we? Or health, or so many other things that just come and go, depending on so many different causes and conditions. So we can just start choosing some of those things, like weather, like relationships. I mean, I've in the last, I don't know how many years, but I've been married now for over 30 years and lived together even longer than that. So Wynn Fricke, one of our teachers here and co-founder of Common Ground, and I, it's just interesting to how that the mind slowly, very slowly learns to just let the other person be. I mean, I'm not there yet, but I see the possibility. I like real freedom, because I see all those impulses now to say something. I still say things I shouldn't say, but I don't say all the things I have an impulse to say. And there's real freedom in that. Just like letting people be, letting the dynamic be what it is. And it's, for those people who are upset about the direction of politics, this is a good thing. And again, it's not about giving up or not showing up. It's specifically about the attachment, the clinging. So if you're getting engaged, then can that engagement, is it helpful to be free of attachment in the engagement? What does the attachment deliver? Is it useful or functional in any way? Is the heart more effective in the places we engage without the attachment or with the attachment? And to really be objective, in the investigation, what do I get from the attachment? And not to confuse wholeheartedness with attachment, right? We can be wholehearted and know that things are going to be the way they're going to be, but I'm all in. Once we get enough interest where we're seeing those two poles, attachment to sense pleasure, really thinking that I can get what I want in a way that will be meaningful, or just feeling like the whole thing's a setup and wanting out and wanting to give up. And we see that there's this other possibility, which is a path of non-attachment, being all in, because we are a human being, we are sensitive, we have desires. That just comes with the territory of being a human being. but we can learn like this third way of not being confused by the desires we have. Well, that's just the desire for waffles, but I have leftovers at home, so I'm going to eat the leftovers. And I'm not afraid of that desire, like as I imagine, whatever it would be for each of us, but waffles. But that's just that. It's just that tug. And we can feel that. And it's there, it's there, it's there. And then what happens? It's not there. It's so nice not to be afraid of having desires, having attractions, having, the different ways our heart gets moved, not being confused by it. So I see the kids are here after being outside, so we'll have them come in a moment to sing with us. But just again, this encouragement to take a look at that article. It goes in more depth than I can here. It's not that long, maybe 6 pages or so. Trading Candy for Gold by Tanisaru Bhikkhu. And again, the link is on the document that you can find in our calendar for that. And maybe before the kids come in, I'll just mention that Shelley Graff in 2 weeks will be leading a day-long retreat on Saturday, 22nd. Thanks, Gabe. And by the way, Gabe Keller-Flores is our operations manager, sort of the hub of our community. So good to know who he is if you're going to be around. Yeah. Definitely worth a clap or two. And what else is coming up that's big?
Well, I wanted to say that if you come on Sunday morning and you've been coming for at least a year or so and you want to be a program host, you could use a few more. So that's what you saw Maddie doing this morning, greeting people, that sort of thing. So just talk to me afterwards or send us an email.
Yeah, and other ways to dig in too. And Gabe generally knows what the community, what the center needs. So check in with Gabe. So thanks. Let's let the kids come in and sing a song for us. And if you would let Lucy be the host, and she can, for those of you online, you can start your small groups for those who want to stay for the small groups.